The Awakened Artist Podcast with John White.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Awakened Artist Podcast. I am John White, the Awakened Artist. This is the third episode of my spirituality series. I want to start this episode with a little jump back in time. About 7 years ago, I started what people would call a spiritual awakening, or as I like to think of it, as a journey of self-discovery. At the time, I had lived a pretty tough life up until that point. My childhood was filled with dysfunction, death, poverty, and that would lead to drugs, alcohol, self-loathing, self-destruction, and just overall unhappiness. I reached a point where I accepted this as who I was. But then a chain of events took place that led me to a medium. And for those of you who don't know what a medium is, or exactly what I mean by a medium, I'm talking about, well, let me talk about her specifically. She is what I guess you would call a medical medium. So basically how she works is she can feel the way that someone has passed in her body, and that's how she begins to identify the person. Once we understand who the person is, then she moves on to messages. Going into the reading, I had treated it with a large amount of skepticism. But something in me wanted it so bad, and I can't really explain it, but I was so drawn to getting a reading and at the same time curious. The reading had changed my perspective completely. I had hope for the first time since I don't know when. And you have to understand, at the time I was pretty much an atheist, living a life only trusting what I could see or touch, basically anything that was scientifically proven. I was all in on science. I mean, I still am, I guess. But I had lost all my faith in any kind of God or religion when I was a teenager. None of my prayers were answered. I was dealing with so much death. I was poor, without my dad being around, without any kind of male role model. I had a single mom who had 5 kids, who struggled terribly with depression because of all of the death. She lost her father when I was a year old, and she was only 19. Then I think she was 30, she lost her mom, and then she lost numerous cousins and aunts, all before I believe she was about 35 years old. We went through stages of being homeless. We bounced around quite a bit. So there's basically no stability in my childhood. Back to the reading, I had received numerous messages during this reading, but there was one in particular at the very beginning that kind of just changed everything for me. My grandma, who I was referring to, my mom's mom, my grandma had passed away when I was 12, and it was really difficult for all of us, especially, I can't say especially for me, but I know it was very difficult for myself just because I was so close with my grandma. Being a 12-year-old kid going into being a teenager, she was really the only stability that we had. My mom having 5 kids again, and us being poor, my dad not being in the picture. It was really tough losing her. In the reading, the medium had mentioned to me something about chicken nuggets. And at this point I knew, well, I didn't know, but I had pieced together that it was my grandma that was coming through. And she was mentioning something about chicken nuggets. And at first I didn't realize, and then it hit me that when I was a kid, McDonald's was something that we maybe got once every couple months, pretty much if there was a birthday party going on. But when I would go over to my grandma's house and I would spend the night by myself, there would be times that she would take me and walk me down to McDonald's and get me chicken nuggets, which was my favorite at the time. And I don't know if there could have been anything else that she said in that reading that could have been more between my grandma and I. I mean, later on, we were talking about this reading in front of my siblings, and my sister was like, wait, what? You got chicken nuggets with grandma? She was a little bit upset. So it was a really big deal. So you could see how impactful this message was for me. It really changed so much for me, because now I knew that my grandma existed somehow still, and all these other relatives that I had lost. And at this point in time, I'm 35, 36, and I had lost numerous friends. I mean, I have a list of so many people that I've lost. Now at this point, there's over 20 people that I've been close to at some point in my life, or family, primarily family. But it opened my eyes to realize that they weren't gone. And a lot of my pain that I had dealt with was the loss of them and all of the repercussions and things that occurred because of these losses. So from that moment on, I was all in. I wanted to learn as much as I could about everything spiritual, where we come from, what happens when we die. I wanted to understand as much as I possibly could. And I've always had this curiosity, even as a kid. Personally, I had a lot of weird things going on as a kid. That's a whole other story for a different time. But my curiosity was through the roof. And from there on, I began what I now know is this process that I started to go through, that I mentioned in the last episode. This process of self-discovery, then healing and growth into self-expression, and eventually starting to have self-love. This episode, I want to dive into the discovery part of the process. Now, keep in mind that this is my journey, and obviously yours can be completely different. And when I speak of this process, again, that it can all fall into place completely different for you. But this is just the way that it worked for me. The discovery phase is probably the most important, though, overall, because you can't really do any healing or growth if you don't know who you are. You can't have self-expression, obviously, if you don't know who you are, and you can't love yourself if you don't know who you are. So this is an extremely important part of the process. So when I talk about discovery, to me, discovery is all about identifying the true self. And what that is all of the characteristics and traits that you were born into the world with, combined with all of your life experiences. And I'm a believer in reincarnation. So when I talk about life experiences, I'm not just talking about this life. I'm talking about past lives. And in turn, those past life experiences are obviously feeding into the characteristics and traits that you're born into this world with. So in this phase or stage, or whatever the hell I'm calling it, we're looking for, what are we looking for? We're looking for our strengths and weaknesses, things that make us happy or cause us pain, or our interests in general, our beliefs in creation and death. What else? Recognizing patterns with partners or other relationships. We're looking to also recognize the anima or the animus, as Carl Jung would call it, the masculine or the feminine energies within us and a good balance of those. What are the things that are healthy and unhealthy in our life? Physically, mentally, emotionally, all of it. And from this, we can begin to understand how to bring balance to our mind, body, and spirit, which is the ultimate goal. That's where we find our true happiness, when we have balance amongst all three. Now, for me, I'm a list maker, so I love to write things down and have them on paper, mainly so that I can have a daily reminder if I need to of what I've learned about myself. And as silly as I guess that sounds, my memory's terrible, so a lot of times I'm jumping around on all these things too, and I'm learning so much that just writing things down helps me. Journaling is a great way to get all of these thoughts and feelings out as you're kind of going through all of this discovery mode. And for me, it took quite a long time because I had buried so much of who I was. It was really just all a part of my journey in general in life. I believe that all of the things that happened to me that were out of my control ended up becoming a huge strength for me now. It's a large part, or they are a large part of who I am. And that's another reason why I do this podcast, in hopes that all of the things that I have learned along my journey that I get to teach others. I mean, what's the point of learning something if you're not able to teach it to other people? But a couple of the things that I did, because it is difficult when you're learning weaknesses and these things that you don't like about yourself, you really got to focus on the strengths. And I made a couple of different lists just to kind of remind myself of who I am. And basically they're all on like one piece of paper. So I could just refer to that piece of paper at times if I was feeling shitty or just in a not so good place in my head, which tends to happen from time to time for everybody. One of the lists I made are what I think I am, things I know that I am. Like, for example, a father, an entrepreneur, a creator, painter, an artist. Another one of those lists were jobs or titles that I had and the skills that came along with them. You know, I own a window tinting business, and with that, I run the show completely. I'm a one-man crew for 8 years now. I've had to learn the marketing, the advertising, to the accounting, customer service, so many things that are all now skills I have access to. And the other list I made was things that I want to be: a landowner, a traveler, you know, just things like that. And all of these lists helped me not focus as much on the weaknesses or the shitty parts of myself, the shadow. Now, don't get me wrong, you have to pay attention to those just as equally, but you need to have something to kind of balance those out to make yourself proud of who you are or what you're becoming and have goals with that. And during this discovery phase, you're going to need some help. You're going to have to kind of look outside of yourself sometimes. Well, the most important thing is to look within. That's the most important part, is looking within yourself. There's tools you can use. Or maybe not tools, maybe that's the wrong word, but ways to help you figure out strengths, weaknesses, primarily patterns. What you're trying to do here is recognize patterns within yourself so you can improve upon the bad ones and keep on using the good ones to continue to better yourself, I guess is the right phrasing. I don't know. You get the idea. So some of the ways we can help figure out who we are is our partners. our family, friends, all of our relationships, those patterns within them that maybe are a little more little problematic for us. If you've been in numerous relationships and there's a common reason for them ending, probably a you thing that needs to be fixed. Another way, one of the biggest things that I've always used because I dream so intensely is Dreamwork. I found a lot of answers within myself. Sometimes not as much. Sometimes, I'm going to bed to ask a question and do all this dream work, and then I have a dream about a horse riding a surfboard down the middle of the street, and yeah, you get the idea. No answers come. But a lot of times I did get quite a bit of answers. A lot of times I got what I was looking for in some way, and it takes a lot of work. That's a whole thing in itself, dream work is. But you can use astrology if you're a believer in that. Astrology is a great way to unlock some things about yourself that maybe you didn't see and maybe you'll recognize. Mediums, psychics, and you got to be careful with that. There's a lot of fakes, or maybe not even so much fakes. There's just a lot of people out there that are kind of learning how to become mediums, and that gets pretty tricky because I've gotten some bad readings before where people have told me some pretty terrible things that never came true, or they misread the information, blah, 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 whatever. Therapy has been a huge one for me. I started therapy about 1.5 years ago, going on 2 years. And it's helped me out a lot, having a neutral person that doesn't have any interest, like say a partner would, or a family member or a friend. They don't have a vested interest in who you are. A lot of times in our relationships, the people we're with, our family, our friends, our partner, they're looking for something. They're looking for something out of you that maybe they don't have within themselves. And that's okay. Sometimes, as long as it's not too much. But having a therapist is great because you don't have that vested interest. Just somebody just listening. And again, I did a whole episode on therapy. Check that out at some point. Therapy definitely helped me out a lot in this process. And listen, like I said, this is 7 years ago I started it. And again, this process kind of bounces all over the place. I'm always discovering. Another way is just to go on vacation. Take a break, go somewhere, do a spiritual retreat, or I don't know, go camping. Go lay on a beach somewhere. Just really pay attention to yourself and go within and think about things and just put it out there. I think the most important way to learn who you are, though, again, is going back to going within yourself. And we all hear that word meditation. It's so important to have peace and quiet. And it's obviously very difficult for a lot of us, especially single parents or people that are extremely busy with their jobs. But that peace and quiet to be able to go within yourself and sit down, move the thoughts out of the day that are coming and going, and just sitting with yourself and paying attention to the way you feel about certain things, understanding that it's hard to describe. And that's something that I can get into at a different time, but that's the whole idea, is really just going within yourself. Overall, this entire process is you're trying to figure out who you are, and you need to do that primarily on your own. One of the best things about this process is you're trying to attract more of the same in your life, the things that you like attracts like. So you're becoming somebody, you're trying to figure out who you want to become, or pay attention to the good characteristics and work on the bad, or the weaknesses, or the shadow, so that you can become happier in life. And in order to be happy, we want to attract more of what brings us happiness. That's the goal, right? Isn't that the goal for all of us, is to attract more of what we want and less of what we don't? Figuring out the things that we don't maybe like about ourselves, we can start to recognize also how much of that we've attracted into our life and what we need to move on from. The aha moments to me during this process of things kind of clicking and being like, oh shit, I remember learning about what an empath was and realizing how many times in my life I used to go to bars all the time. I love to go out and just get really drunk as fast as I could in a bar. And it makes complete sense now because of how empathetic I am in being, and this is something I just learned here recently, that I had my chart wrong, and my natal chart, and I realized that I'm a Pisces sun, a Taurus moon, and a Gemini rising. So that feeds into, obviously, the empathetic parts of me. And now that I understand that, I can navigate that more than before, where I was completely confused walking into a crowded space and feeling super anxious and nervous and just feelings that I didn't have before I walked in there. Sometimes it would just be complete and utter anger or being uncomfortable, sad, all these feelings that I had no reason to feel. They just came out of nowhere. And now that I understand that, it helps me so much in the way I navigate through my everyday life. So having those moments where you're like, oh shit, I understand now why all of this time I felt that way or thought that way. So basically those aha moments, they are what you're looking forward to. I, in a sense, wish I could go back so many times to having those feelings, which I still get them here and there, but putting the puzzle pieces together that are me, looking back on it now, I remember those exciting feelings that I would get that would carry on for a couple days or an entire weekend or a week. A sense of pride would come about me. And yeah, that's the fun part of this entire process. Don't focus on the weaknesses. That stuff will work itself out as long as you're paying attention to it. As long as you put it out there and you become aware of the weaknesses, you'll slowly start to change them because they'll become annoying to you. In a sense, you'll start to realize that they're the embarrassing parts of you. And the more that you recognize them, the more that you won't embarrass yourself. You'll fix them. So to basically wrap this up, I think the most important thing to realize is that we will always be discovering new aspects of ourselves. And as we grow, we discover things that no longer make sense in our life. We adjust to new change. Change is growth, if you let it be. Having said that, I think I'll end it there. Thanks again for listening to another episode. In the next one, we're going to get into healing and growth. Healing those traumatic things that happen in our life. And I guess I really didn't touch on that at all in this, but we'll touch on more of that later. During this discovery process, you're probably going to find out some things that you remember that happened in your life that kind of caused you to become who you are now, in a sense, that need to be healed. And through the healing process, we begin to grow. And yeah, that'll be the next episode. So again, I appreciate you listening to another one of my podcasts. If you have any questions, please contact me on Instagram or email me, whatever is easiest. I really appreciate feedback, and I have no problem with answering any questions that you may have about the podcast or even my all over the place Instagram page. Please follow me on Instagram. You can see just how weird and all over the place I am, or who I've become now, and my story. So, thanks again. If you'd like to learn more about me and my experiences, follow @AwakenHardest on Instagram or visit the website awakenhardest.com.